Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. Thanks for joining today's webinar session. It's a quite informational webinar today for the programmers who are working in the SCORM or working with the SCORM. So my name is Manish Gupta and I'm going to be your moderator today. And in today's session, it's a part 2 of the last week of the SCORM webinar series. So in this webinar, we will be covering the advanced topics of the SCORM building and reporting. Today, I have joined by two experts, Brian Rush and Ajay Upadhyay, who will be presenting today's session, demonstrating some of the functionalities which we will talk in the agenda, and then we'll be taking your questions. So a quick housekeeping here. So if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to post them into the question box of your GoToWebinar control panel, or you can ask them towards the later part of the webinar. That's when we will have the Q&A session, or you can always post your questions. Go to the EduBrite's user community at university.edubrite.com and ask questions there. So here is a quick agenda for today. It's a part 2 of the SCORM series which we conducted last week. Today's session is more geared for the programmers who are working with the SCORM. So in today's agenda, we will be covering the SCORM interactions and objectives. We'll go in some of the details there. We'll also have a demonstration of a hand-coded SCORM. We'll also be demonstrating the reportings on interaction and objectives, and we'll talk about the SCORM vulnerabilities. And definitely in the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So with this, I'll hand it over to one of our experts, Brian.
Thank you, Manish. As Manish just mentioned, we're going to talk about objectives and interactions, but not objectives from the instructional design perspective. That was last week. So you're not going to see this anymore. It's more about objectives being the variables that can store information about one SCO in the LMS for retrieval later. Objectives can be stored and retrieved by JavaScript in the SCO and accessed by sequencing rules within the LMS. Some of the uses for objectives include remediation, where we're tracking the status of assessment parts components within a SCO, and then sharing the score of one SCO with another SCO in a multi-SCO course. Just as with variables, objectives need to vary in their scope. So there are local variables, and those are defined at the activity level and are usually mapped to a shared global objective using the map info element. Global shared objectives are used anytime you need to share tracking information from one activity within another, or if you need the status of an activity to persist across multiple attempts. And so here's an example of a primary objective, which we're going to get into in a moment. And it's map info tag here with the target objective ID of this shared global one, objective global. So that's how you would map that local one to a global one. So with objectives, each SCO can set or read multiple objectives, and a single objective can be set or read by multiple SCOs. So you have a many-to-many relationship here. Each objective contains the following information: success status, completion status, progress measure, and score. Score being not only the raw score, but the minimum and maximum scores as well. These look familiar to you probably because they are the statuses and information within the actual statuses of the CMI data model. While there's a one-to-many relationship with activities to objectives, there's only a one-to-one relationship with the primary objective. Let's talk about the primary objective a little bit more here. Each SCO and aggregation has a special local objective, the primary objective, which contains the core status of that activity. The primary objective of an activity is like a roll-up of the secondary objectives and stores the data for the activity's overall satisfaction and score. the minimum normalized measure defines the passing score for the activity. In this particular example, the passing score is set to 0.8 or 80%. Primary and secondary objectives are defined inside the objectives element nested within the sequencing element. So this is all packaged in nested XML with the objectives and the sequencing being part of that. Let's talk about interactions. The CMI interactions data model element provides a detailed model for designers and programmers to collect metrics about learner responses within a SCO, particularly detailed data related to performance on assessments such as expected correct response, the learner's actual response, duration taken, etc. These are the types here. When we say interactions, we're leaving that generic term open, but typically anytime somebody's talking about interactions, it's actually about assessment related interactions, and these are the question types that you're able to use within interaction. You're seeing true, false, multiple choice, and multiple select, fill in the blank, the long fill in, which has 4,000 characters, and matching, sequencing, where you're asking the learner to put a set of steps into a particular order. Likert is your familiar survey question, where you have a scaled response of, say, 1 through 5, 1 being good and 5 being bad, or the other direction. Or it could be a different scale of 7 or whatever. Numeric is where you're asking for an integer, and it might be a question such as how many months are in the year, or something of that nature, in which you're expecting a numeric answer. And then other. So these are the interaction data model elements. The CMI interactions data model element is an array type object consisting of many interactions. A single interaction describes an assessed item. An interaction is represented by dot notation that you're seeing here, CMI interactions dot whatever. And that dot notation is similar to other CMI data model elements. Note the dot N in the interaction names. An interaction is a collection of information stored in arrays, and the CMI data model uses a zero-based array, and that's where this N comes in here. So as you're seeing in most of these, except the top 2, you're seeing the N in here, and that's because that's an array, and each time an interaction is added, it increments that N. So with CMI interactions children, that lists the elements of the category that are supported by the LMS. The count is the number of interactions created by the SCO. And then the ID is a unique label for that particular interaction. And then the n.objectives count is the number of objectives that are associated with that interaction. So if you have multiple questions tied to a single objective, this is where you'll say where the number of interactions that are or objectives tied to this interaction. And then the objectives MID is set by the SCO to identify the nth objective, whatever that N is standing for at that particular time. And then the time is the date time stamp of when the nth interaction was completed. The description, it says, is a brief description of the interaction, but typically in the real world, that's the stem of the question, or the prefix of what the question actually is. The type refers to the question types that we just went over on the last slide. The correct responses count. This is typically used for a multiple select question in which there are more than one response. And the pattern is the next one, and that one is the correct response pattern. So if you have a multiple select question and it has 1, 3, and 5 choices as the correct ones, that's how you would identify it with this pattern here. Weighting has to do with making one question more important than another or worth more points. So that's where you would do this here if you had to. It's optional. The student response is the actual answer given by the learner, whether it be a choice or a typed in answer. And then the result is whether it's correct or incorrect. And latency is the amount of time that it took the learner when the question was presented to them to actually answer that question. So when we're recording interactions, we can do it in one of two ways, journal or state. And when it really matters is when there are multiple attempts available for the learner. So if the learner is retaking an assessment, you want the learner to be able to, you want to keep both of their responses from the previous one and the existing current one. Then you would want to append the new responses to the existing one in the case of journal. In case you wanted to overwrite their existing responses, that would be state. And there's different ways to do that. Like I said, the looping would happen when you want to try and find the number of ints here. So this code says we've got a variable declared as num ints, and we're getting the value from the LMS of CMI interactions count. That's the number of interactions in there. And then we could do a set value of CMI interactions and concatenate the number of ints, and then concatenate ID, and then look for that ID, and then overwrite that particular data for that interaction. That's how that would work. You would do a for loop for that as well. With this, I'm going to hand it off to AJ here, and he's going to give a demonstration next on hand coding in SCORM.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. All right, so I'll start by creating an example of hand-coded SCORM. Why hand-coded SCORM? Because sometimes as a developer, you might want to experiment with what kind of data you can send to LMS. And also, in some cases, the authoring tool may have some limitation, or for some reasons, you might not want to use any standard authoring tool for SCORM building. And also, like, for some lightweight cases, it's very simple to package something as a SCORM and upload it in LMS. So that's the few reasons why I would think hand coding might be useful to know. So we'll start by creating a small keynote presentation, and we'll show how you can package it as a SCORM and load it in LMS. It could be any LMS. I will use EduBrite for this demonstration. So I'm going to start by creating a small presentation here. And I'll add a few slides. Here I'm going to add a video just to show that, in Keynote, of course, you can use audio, video, audio just for the narration, or video for if, let's say, you want to package any kind of simulation in that. So you can record screen grab and then insert it in Keynote. Then I'm going to just add a few more slides. So this is going to be our last slide. And now, just to make it a little bit interesting, I can add some animations here so that we can add some effects. So, like, for example, I can make this video to start automatically when the slide is presented. And then I can make it automatic. Then for these bullets, we can make them appear one by one. and then you can make it on click. And the first one can be automatic. The next one, let's keep it pretty simple. No animations here. So everything will be on click, and then the last slide. Of course, my keynote skill is not something that can be trusted. So you guys can use your own ideas when building this. But the idea is to show you how to package it as a SCORM. So just export it as an HTML, and it is going to create a folder in which it will put all the exported files. So this is how the exported files will look like. So a folder inside which there will be an index.html, and then there are a bunch of other folders and files. And just to take a preview of how this thing looks, you can view it in the browser. So this is basically what we have kind of created so far. Now let's see how we can package it in the LMS, because right now I cannot load this thing in LMS as is. It has to be one of the supported content type, which most LMS will not allow you to just upload a arbitrary HTML stuff with a bunch of other associated files. But a SCORM can be a self-contained package. So that's why we'll use this SCORM for the packaging of it. So in this, if you're familiar with how the Keynote export works, it basically produces a bunch of JavaScript files to drive that presentation in the browser in HTML format with JavaScript. So these are the two main files, Keynote, the HTML player, and the JS. So we are going to add some more JavaScript files to add the SCORM wrapper functionality on top of it. So there are few files which are provided as a reference by the ADL, API wrapper, and SCO functions. So these are the two files which are pretty standard. You can download from their website. SCO functions and API wrapper. So API wrapper basically has the code for sending the API calls to LMS. Like, it will make calls to LMS initialize when you want to call this. It will. So this is supposed to be the first thing when the page loads, and this is supposed to be the last thing when you are exiting from the SCORM. And then there are other things to get and set the value. So these are some of the functions here. And to make the use of these functions pretty simple, there is another wrapper which you can use. So like you can directly call load page, which in turn does the API calls and then initializes the timer and computes that how much time you have spent on the SCORM, etc. So these are all standard files I'm using. In addition to these, we have also added one file which is specific to Keynote player. So this file basically acts as a delegate. So whenever the Keynote player is loaded in the browser, it expects that if there is a delegate provided, then it will start sending the callbacks to that delegate function, delegate object, and then delegate can perform anything that it wants to. So here we have an EB delegate, which will communicate to the LMS about where you are in the presentation. And also if you exit the presentation in between, it will bookmark your current state. And each time it resumes, it will first get the value from the LMS so that it can resume from that particular point. And as you are moving from slide to slide, it will basically, based on the number of slides in the presentation, it will communicate about your current progress in the presentation. And if you reach the last slide, then it will send the completion status to the LMS. So this is what this particular JavaScript is doing. So we'll drop these three JavaScript files here. And then we need to also refer these three files in the in the HTML code of the Keynote player. So we will just edit this here. So you'll see all these its specific JavaScript files included here, and we'll just add these 3 references also inside that. And then once that is done, then our scripting part is ready. Now all we need to do is to make anything SCORM, we need a manifest. So here is a very simple IMS manifest file. So let's look at it. So this manifest is based on 1.2, SCORM 1.2, and it has just one SCO. So that one SCO corresponds to the whole presentation that we built, and that SCO basically refers to a resource, and that resource basically corresponds to the Keynote HTML player that I showed you before. And we are passing our object as a delegate so that it knows where to pass the callback events. Here in this, you can of course edit the title and description, which will get populated when you upload this SCORM in the LMS. You can write any description here, and once that is done, then you can zip everything, the entire folder. Make sure IMS manifest is the top level entry. So from the here on, you can package it. So this is the zip file, which actually has now everything necessary to run it as a SCORM. Previously, what you had was just a HTML folder, but LMS would not accept that as a valid file. So now this is a valid file, which we can upload in the LMS. So here we are using EduBrite LMS, but you could potentially do it in any other LMS, which supports SCORM 1.2. So I'm just creating a simple course and going to add that hand-coded SCORM here. So our package is loaded here. We can go to the properties. You can see that it has picked the name and the description from the manifest. And just from the EduBrite perspective, a course can have many SCORM packages or other type of content. And to make it mark the course completion, you need to use some other settings, such as making an item, at least one item, mandatory, so that LMS knows when the whole course will be marked as completed. So here we are saying that when the user finishes this particular item, the whole course will be completed. And then we'll publish it. Once the course is published, we'll create a course session in which users will be enrolled as a learner. So this is just a sample course session entries default. I'm not making changes to anything. And I'm also enrolling everybody from my group. So now the course session is created. We can see these are all the learners enrolled in it. And then now we'll go as a learner and take this course. So this is basically a learner's view, and we can see demo hand-coded course session here, and we can launch it. So once you launch this, the EduBrite course player, and once you want to launch the SCORM here. So here is how our SCORM will look inside the LMS. The exact same Keynote thing that we exported is now loaded here. Now, if you want to just click through it, it will advance. So that's basically done by the Keynote player, HTML player. So just click through it. It will go to the next one. And each click will run the next animation. And if you want to, say, for example, exit from here for some reason in a long presentation, then we can see LMS is also maintaining the bookmarking, because our hand-coded SCORM is communicating on which slide you were. So it should resume from slide 1 next time. So let's exit from here just for the demo. And you can see it is not marked it complete yet because we did not reach to the end of the presentation. Now if we launch it next time, it resumes from slide 1 instead of the intro slide or the beginning slide. It's up to us how we want to send the bookmarking information to LMS and how we want to use it. I have coded it to start from the slide rather than from a specific animation within that slide. But you could have even gone a further step by bookmarking a particular state of the animation and resume from that state. So this is the second slide, and then once I click, it will go to the end of the slide, and then that will mark it as finished because this is the last slide. And then we can see that SCORM has completely completed everything what the learner has supposed to do, and then it has also sent the completion status to the LMS, and it is complete marked here. And this was the only mandatory item, so the whole course is also marked completed. So this was a quick run through of how you can hand code a very simple SCORM using pretty much tools which people are familiar. So if anything you can use to export something as HTML, you can easily package it as a SCORM. So next we'll go into the demo of interactions. So Brian talked about a lot of internal details of the SCORM, like which CMI variables are used to track the interactions. Interactions are nothing but most commonly use of interaction is quizzes, but SCORM can be used for other type of interactions also, but 99% cases I see them being used for quizzes. So we'll run two examples here, SCORM 1.2 and 2004. Both are identical, but we'll show how the reporting differs. So first we'll launch 1.2, and unfortunately this one, the SCORM package requires Flash, so that's what you saw. Ideally nowadays you should be building SCORM using HTML5, so it should not have any Flash dependency. So this one has a few slides, and then there is a quiz at the end, which basically will send the interaction data to the LMS. So here we can just pick some simple multiple choice answers. I'll just make one answer wrong purposefully. And the quiz is supposed to be, it's set with 75% passing score. So if I answer 3 out of 4 correct, then I will pass this. So that's pretty much it. I passed the quiz with 75% score, and then I can exit from there. And here I can see that the LMS has received 75% as my final score in that particular item within this course, and that was the only item. So that's the score I see in the end. Now, if we look at from the reporting perspective, so in this browser, I'm going as a administrator. So all the SCORM reports in EduBrite LMS are under these two areas, package attempts and activity attempts. So I'll go into the activity attempt. Activity refers to SCO in EduBrite terminology. So, and the package refers to the entire zip. So if you have a SCORM package which has multi-SCO, then that package will have multiple activities in EduBrite terminology. So in this example, there was only single activity which was tracked here. So we can see that this is the latest activity, and here it shows interaction. It means for this activity, interaction data was sent from SCORM to the LMS. So we can look at what was that interaction data. So here we can see that all the quiz answers were sent to LMS, and you can see some of the elements which Brian had described, like the time when this question was answered. Latency was not sent, so that's why it is blank. And these are basically the points on that particular question, the learner's response, and whether it was correct or incorrect. And also the question type. So these are all multiple choice type questions. So you can see those. Description is blank because in SCORM 1.2, question description or interaction description element was not there. So none of these interaction have any details about. So that was one of the shortcoming. You can easily see that we know the choice responded by the user, but we don't know what that question was. So that's kind of half information sent to the LMS. But if you look for the reporting within LMS, because LMS does not have anything more than the responses, it cannot tell you also. So it is limited by what the SCORM is sending to it. Now, if we take the example of 2004, so the same quiz, but same course, but now this time it is exported as a 2004. Let me just pick the different one. So exact same articulate based package, and we'll go through the quiz quickly. So again, I'm going to just repeat that same mistake. So now I passed the quiz and should mark me as completed, which it did. And then if we go into the reports here, so this is the latest activity attempt on a different course. So if we go inside the interaction here, you can see now everything pretty much same as what we saw in 1.2, except now we have the question description also. So this is very helpful if your SCORM reporting requirement includes any kind of quiz analysis or item analysis, then use 2004 for exporting your SCORM content, because then the LMS can provide some extended reporting, which I'm going to show next. So besides these activity attempts, EduBrite LMS has done one kind of an extra reporting feature, which basically accumulates all the responses on a particular SCORM package by all other learners and builds a kind of a native test when in EduBrite, so that it can provide the item analysis. So let's look at what does that mean. So if we go to the test scores report and look at the particular course, and so you'll see there is a test included here, and this test is not something which we added in the course in EduBrite. We added a SCORM, but when the SCORM data started coming into the LMS has actually constructed an implicit test as if you had created it natively in EduBrite. And then on this particular test, you can see all the quiz scores, as well as you can go to the question statistics. So this is what we mean by the item analysis. So if you look at now this report, this is a report which combines the responses from all other learners for this particular SCORM, and you can see how many times, say for example, choice A was selected versus B, C, or D, and it will give you that reporting here. So like 1 correct, 3 incorrect. So those things you can see easily from here. And as more and more people take the course and they select other incorrect choices, so LMS will start learning about those incorrect choices also, and then those questions will start becoming more full. So here you are seeing 4 choices. In other questions you are seeing just 1, because all the attempts, 4 attempts, selected this correct choice. So LMS so far doesn't know about the choice B, C, or D, which are there in the SCORM, because the only element SCORM sends to LMS is learner's response and correct response. If both are same, then LMS would not know anything beyond what the learner selected. If the learner selects incorrect response, then LMS gets the opportunity to learn about, okay, this was the incorrect response, this was the learner's response, but this was the correct response. And if over a period all all incorrect choices get selected by some learner, then LMS would know everything about this particular question's choices, and it can give you the correct item analysis. So again, this is something which is not a standard reporting, but something which is unique to EduBrite. So this is about interaction reporting. The other thing I want to show a little bit about and talk about is the objective reporting. So in the activity reports here, you can see this particular attempt. So here you can see that in this particular activity attempt, there were interactions, which we can see from here. So pretty detailed question description, and you can also see different type of questions like choice, numeric, true, false, etc. All of these details. But more importantly, what I want to highlight here is the objective area. So if your activity includes objectives, or your package includes objective, and your SCORM is coded to track the score against each of the objective. So objective could be like functionally, it could be related to something that you want to track how the learner is doing with respect to certain learning objective. Like within a course, you might have information about 4 different things, and you may have questions about those 4 different things, and you want to just summarize the result against all those 4 different things by tagging the question with each of these objectives. So depending on whether the learner responded 100% about the etiquette or handicapping or having fun or playing, you can see their overall summary score like this at the end. So again, this is something which is provided by LMS only if the SCORM is communicating to the LMS with those variables. And so this is pretty much what I wanted to cover in this demo area. In addition to that, I'll just quickly pull up the database and show you a more detailed view of everything. So for example, if we go into any of this particular activity attempt, I'm just trying to show you how detailed information LMS receives from the SCORM. So like if you look at this information in the database, so these are all the variables which get sent by the SCORM to the LMS. Now these are about the interaction as well as objectives. So and you can see that each of these interactions have some index. So this basically indicates the multi-value field. So all the interaction with 0 is basically the first question and second question and so forth. And then there are some variables which are not interactions or not multi-valued, like location could be used for bookmarking, or there could be score, min, max, raw, scaled. So this is like the range 0 to 100, and then the raw score is 67, but the scaled score has to be always between 0 and 1, so that is 0.67. Session time indicates how much time you spent, and then there are other things such as objective specific score. So for each of the objective, what was the maximum score and how much you achieved in that particular objective, which is what gets reported on this page here. All right, so with this, I think demo part is done. Feel free to post your questions. If you have any questions, we'll take it shortly. Now, I want to also talk about a little bit in the area of some of the limitations of SCORM. So as we saw, SCORM is heavily JavaScript based. The whole spec is centered on JavaScript technology. So if you can hack JavaScript, you can hack SCORM, which is not a good news, but that's how it is. So from the awareness perspective, it is important to be aware that anyone who can hack into JavaScript or can send some fake messages to the LMS LMS would have no other way but to trust it. So, for example, I can fake a a success response from the SCORM without actually going through the SCORM. So I can bypass the quiz entirely, and I can send a completion message to the LMS, and LMS would trust it because it is driven by the spec, and the spec only says about if you receive this variable from the SCORM, you need to consider it as how it is specified in the spec. So there is a definitely security loophole possibility here, and if let's say you are planning any kind of serious certification type of usage, then for the assessment area of that, I would rely more on the native quizzes built in LMSs, any LMS that you use. If they don't evaluate and declare the result of that quiz from the browser, rather they do it on the server side, they are more secure. So anything which is sent from anywhere where the result is sent from the browser to the LMS can't be fully trusted. So that was one vulnerability we would like to highlight. But yeah, I mean, it is difficult to exploit, but it is not impossible. And the moment it gets exploited, it can become a commodity knowledge, which can spread very quickly. And so it's important to be aware of those things. So with that, we can move to the conclusion. Yeah, so I mean, now from session 1 and session 2, we discussed a lot of points, both from the authoring perspective as well as delivery and tracking. In total, I would still see SCORM as a viable option for many cases, despite it being very old specification and has some security flaw. The reason being that for any kind of scenario where you need a lot of interactivity and simulation, those type of content, definitely SCORM is probably one of the option available, because most LMSs don't have full-fledged native rich media building options like SCORM authoring tools provide you. Or you can also create those rich interaction or rich experience in anything like Adobe InDesign or Keynote we just saw, and package it as SCORM and load it in the LMS. LMSs are not typically as powerful in providing those kind of authoring experience. So SCORM is very viable option still. 2004 has more detailed reporting. We saw that an example was interaction description, which cannot be sent from 1.2 but can only be sent from 2004. And based on that, LMS can provide you more detailed reporting. Interaction and objectives are very important for the SCORM designer. If you are an instructional designer, definitely consider using interaction and objective, so that not only you can track the completion of the particular SCORM, but you can also track the user's performance against multiple dimensions. So each of those objective could give you option to define multiple dimensions that you want to track. And natively created, of course, some of these assessment natively built in LMSs are better for high stake exams. We already spoke about it. So with this, we can go into Q&A. Are there any questions?
Yes, So we have a few questions. So actually, in these questions are in some of the topics you talked in the later part of the demonstration. So the first question I am seeing here is that what is the version of a SCORM that you would recommend most?
Yeah, so there can be two perspectives. One is portability. So one of the very important purpose of a SCORM is to create portable content which can be loaded in any kind of LMS. So if you are looking for portability, go with 1.2. The reason is that not many LMSs support 2004. So that will give you the most mileage if you're exporting it as 1.2 and maintaining. But if you are looking for detailed reporting or advanced reporting, as we saw, then go for 2004.
Okay. All right. Now you talked about the vulnerabilities. So I have a question that are there any other options available which are as vulnerable as a SCORM?
Yeah, so I would say anything which sends the result from the client to the server will be equally vulnerable. So the best options are to rely on things built natively within LMS for the high stake exams.
Okay. All right, we have a couple of more questions, and another question is this is on the interaction side of it. So question is, can I set up a survey with Likert questions to report anonymously?
Yeah, so that is an interesting question because in the spec of the SCORM, everything starts with a student ID. So the SCORM interaction with LMS is in context of a given student. So if you want to do anything anonymously, your LMS should support, first of all. Most LMSs don't do it. So if check with your LMS, EduBrite, of course, doesn't support anonymous viewing of SCORM. So we don't support it. But we do support anonymous survey, which you can build within EduBrite directly. So those surveys can be used for anonymous type of response collection, but not the SCORM one.
Okay.
But there may be other LMSs who might support it. So check about with the LMS.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good answer. Another question I have here is that what is the best practice in naming the objectives and interactions?
Yeah. So always come up with the naming convention before you even start building your content. The reason being, if your naming is consistent, you can get a lot of mileage in terms of the aggregate reporting, such as suppose you have a 10 different SCORMs, but if those 10 different SCORMs have no consistency in naming their objective or interaction, then you can't really roll up or fold that data into a common report. But if you have common consistent naming in those objectives across multiple SCORM also, then SCORM packages also, then you can get some kind of aggregated reporting across SCORM. So come up with some global naming, of course, like use some prefixes like obj underscore for objective and something else for interaction, and always use a consistent ID for every question. So always assign some specific interaction ID for every question, so that let's say you are changing that question, then don't reuse that ID that was used before, because that will affect your reporting. So always keep an eye on how you are naming or allocating the IDs for each of these interaction, because interaction reporting will get impacted based on what choices you make.
Okay, all right. Then Ajay, I have a couple of more questions and we have time, so we'll just continue here. The next question is slightly more descriptive, so I'm just going to read it. That it's a situation about the interaction or the question pool. So if I have an assessment with randomly drawn questions from a pool and allow multiple attempts, I want to make certain each attempt draws a different set randomly drawn questions. How can I accomplish this? Would I use state or journal?
Yeah, so this will, I think, depend on, first of all, how you are building this SCORM. So how part will be very, very dependent on whether the authoring tool you have supports the pooling and randomization, and specifically selecting different question in each attempt. So first part is actually dependent on the authoring tool. Most of the SCORM authoring tools do support it, but in case you are hand coding it, then it makes it slightly more difficult to hand code this kind of scenario. So if you have this kind of need, use some standard authoring tool. And then for regarding the question about state or journaling, now basically the state will overwrite the answers, right? So state will basically reuse the same ID for each position of the interaction. So if, let's say, you took first attempt and you had 4 interactions and then you retake it, state will probably reuse the IDs, interaction IDs based on the sequence. Like, it will again rename them as 0, 1, 2, 3. So it will override the previous responses. Whereas if you use journaling, then it will be accumulated. So better to keep journaling because it will provide you a better information about all the attempts the user has taken about the particular quiz or interaction.
Okay.
So journaling would be my preferred way.
Okay. Yeah, great. If you have any other questions, feel free to post in the question box there. And then there's another question related to the webinar recording. So we will definitely share that shortly, that link, and webinar recording will also be sent out as part of our email communication. So I will give it another 10-15 seconds, and if there are no questions, then we can go on to the final slide. So let's actually, Brian, go to the final slide here. So this is just a quick slide which how you can be connected with EduBrite. So one of the best way is that if you can follow EduBrite's Twitter handle, that's where you can get all the webinar announcement. Also, we post the webinar recording in the Twitter. So that's the simplest way. But in addition to that, if you are basically, you have created this, you joined today's webinar on EduBrite's university site. On the same university site where you joined, we have a link there of the past webinars recording. So you can go there and find the webinar recording there. So, but you will also get this via email, which we'll be communicating to you shortly. So with this, we are at the end of our webinar. So I appreciate, thanks Brian. Thanks Ajay for a wonderful conversation today. Thank you all for joining from different places and for a wonderful questions. The questions were really amazing. So, and we'll continuing our webinar sessions in the next week or following week. So look out for new announcements of the webinar on EduBrite's Twitter channel, or look for your email. And there's another quick question in the open. Yeah, you can find the webinar recording in the open learning button, or if you go to the university and click on the EduBrite University site, and on the university side, you will see a webinar on the left side. And on that page, you will see, Brian, if you can just quickly pull up, if you have that handy, the university site, if you can pull up, I can just quickly show here. So that way it goes into the recording also. Yeah, so this is where you see the past webinar, view past webinars. So this is where you will be able to find all the recordings. So today's recording will also be posted there. And it's a standard place for any webinar you will go, you will find all the webinar recordings right here. So thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your time, and we look forward you to join our next session. Have a good day.
Thank you.